Thank you very much, colleagues and comrades. It gives me great joy to be on this field of struggle with all of you that we have been supporting and working together for a long time. We now face a unique, critical moment in the history of humanity with an extraordinary confluence of economic, health, and democratic crises and an environmental tragedy. I don't think it is an exaggeration by hearing from our colleague Noam Chomsky of Progressive International Council to say that humanity has never before been so close to apocalypse. But as Joao Pedro said, we cannot be pessimistic. However, we should work with Gramsci with this pessimism and the optimism of will. And I believe that we have shown the complete ineffectiveness of the current economic system in terms of resolving all kinds of problems. And in terms of capitalism, we can now assert that it is incompatible with human survival, as Yanis Varoufakis has said. Another thing that the pandemic has shown is that violence and deep inequality, particularly in Latin America, which continues to be the most unequal region of the world, is unsustainable. Within this context, Latin America must review and analyze its insertion into geopolitics very carefully. A short while ago, in 2018, there was a formal visit from the United States Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, in 2018. He visited regional allies, or what they call their regional partners, and he gave two pieces of advice and warnings, very strong and clear warnings. One was that his regional partners of the United States must step up their pressure to have a regime change in Venezuela. His second piece of advice was that the countries of Latin America should not negotiate with either China or Russia. He said this within the context of the Monroe Doctrine, America for the Americans, and the Big Stick. I mean, going back to the Big Stick approach, which are, and Monroe Doctrine, which are the pillars of U.S. policy. As Joao Pedro said, this no longer is tenable, but they continue to try to use this ideologically and theoretically. Therefore, so we believe that we have to carry out a big cultural battle. Over the last decade, Latin America has undergone an extreme process with regional banks, with this concurrence of leftist progressive leaders such as Commander Chavez, Fidel Castro, Evo Morales, Correa, and the two Kirchner administrations, Daniel Ortega, Rafael Correa, and etc. In this, we were able to expand Mercosur with the presence of Venezuela. When I was a deputy in our National Congress, I drafted the bill to bring Venezuela into Mercosur, and we all agreed that this was going to bring a great progress to our bloc, but we also forged UNASUR, which had a supranational institutions that was quite dense, for example, with the Security Council and with the roles assigned to the armed forces in charge of taking care of our natural resources, and a Security Council that was able to avoid two coups d'etats, one in Bolivia and another attempted police coup in Ecuador. And many things were left pending in terms of building the great utopias of Commander Chavez, such as creating a Bank of the South, in which we could put our hard currency not in the United States and not in the dollar, but rather to create a southern version of NATO. And also, starting in 2011, when I was in Caracas on December 3rd, 2011, when we created the community of Caribbean and Latin American states, in which it included so many hundreds of millions of people, the third largest producer in the world, the third largest producer of energy in the world. And what did we have? An exchange. Uh, we felt that we had the opportunity to have political and economic sovereignty in order to bring about social justice. Now, when what Rafael Correa calls the neoliberal restoration, when this came to Latin America with the Temer, Bolsonaro, and Macri administrations, and Lenin Moreno, the great trader of the Americas, we suffered through these governments as true agencies of the disintegration of our unity, all at the service of the United States. And they, UNASUR and CELAC were brought down, and they created coup-mongering groups such as the Lima Group. I regret that on October 6, 2020, the government of Argentina, that is to say the new government of Argentina, which we supported, voted on October 6th in favor of a resolution at the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva. It voted in favor of a resolution to increase the sanctions on Venezuela together with the Lima Group and with a European contact group that really sought to interfere in the domestic affairs of Venezuela, while Argentina has traditionally defended the founding principles of non-intervention, non-interference, free self-determination of peoples, and the legal independence of states. So this event led me to resign as ambassador from Argentina to Russia, which I had been very honored to serve in, because quite frankly, I do not agree with this foreign policy position. We know that the United States mission to Venezuela has absolutely nothing to do with protecting freedom, but has everything to do with protecting its access to oil.
200 years ago, Bolívar said that the US seemed to be marked by providence to plague Latin America with mysteries in the name of freedom. Since they cannot do it anymore in the name of freedom, because this criteria has been exposed in all of its brutality, particularly in the wars in the Middle East, with the destruction of, for example, Libya, which was the most prosperous country in Africa. So now they're using a different resource, a different strategy, which I consider to be extremely concerning, which is the responsibility to protect. The responsibility to protect is a concept according to which human rights are universal, and therefore it is the mandate of other countries to protect them. So it would be, in a way, a moral call for help due to internal human rights concerns that would demand the application of international right. And the first application of this was the one that justified the military invasion of Libya. So we need to be very, very alert and resist and reject this criteria, just as the ambassador of Venezuela to the United Nations has done, our friend Jorge Valero. The second issue that Rex Tillerson stated very clearly, which is the United States government, is that Latin America should abstain and retreat from their relations with Russia and China. And this is because the US has a very contradictory way of relating to different countries through submission, threats, and financial usury. So while Russia and China respect the sovereignty of countries without any military bases beyond their borders, they respect sovereignty even in the cases where they have large contributions to the well-being of those people. Felix Plasencia, the current ambassador of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela to China, he points out that the US tries to avoid violations of human rights. This attempt, they are attempting to do something that is unavoidable in this multipolar world where China needs to take on particular a particular position to build a new paradigm for the country and the world as a whole. And he signals the initiative of Jinping from the creation of an Asian bank for infrastructure. And I'd like to quote as well our very young ambassador from Argentina to China, Sabino Vaca Narvaja. He was a pioneer, a young pioneer who remembers that China has its goals set on the Congress of the party to build a modern society and to turn the country into a modern, developed, socialist country, strong and in harmony. And he also points out that the long walk of planned development from the state on the basis of focalized incentive programs, such as those that were focused on strategic industry, renewable energy, biotechnology, the field of artificial intelligence, of 5G technology that will be applied to different sectors. China then innovates in such a remarkable way that the US, with their sanctions, they have the intention to stop the whole of humanity in this technological progress. So I believe our region needs to have a coordinated view in regards to the possibilities that our relationship with China would bring. Latin America hasn't yet published a white book as China did, where it states what are the goals of Chinese politics towards the Latin American region. Now, I cannot continue on for much longer, but I wanted to mention a very specific example of how the US come close, how they come, how they relate to our countries through totalitarianism and financial usury. We know this using the IMF, which is completely dependent on the US and its allies. So they indebt countries not only for financial usury, but also to introduce political conditions for the payment of that debt. Basically, it's reduction of wages, the change of social security system, and many other conditions of the like. On the other hand, China, when they get involved in this kind of international credit, they do so to exchange infrastructure. Now, in Argentina, we have a very important example of this. In 2015, China granted a huge credit of $407 million to the US in a state to state negotiation in order to build two dams that in Patagonia will be generating clean energy. It employs also 5,000 workers for the construction in the province of Santa Cruz. And it could also promote more tourism in the area. Now, the US opposed this project. They created a large variety of excuses. And during the government of Macri, the project came to a standstill. Not only that, but they even imprisoned the director of the company in charge, Gerardo Ferreira. He was in charge of the construction. Now, because as we know, lawfare has dominated in the last few years in Latin America, the manipulation of justice to persecute mainly political leaders and the progressive projects of the regions. Of course, the charges were false. Gerardo Ferreira is no longer in prison, but this happened. This took place together with very serious issues, such as the electoral fraud against Lula da Silva, of Chavez, the coup d'etat in Bolivia, and trying to prevent now free, legitimate elections in Ecuador. Now, this credit that I mentioned right now in Argentina would be then later paid with the production of energy itself. And I mentioned this to highlight the type of relationship that I think, of course, is more convenient for our region. And finally, I'd like to close just by saying that I am very pleased to have shared and to continue sharing these ideas with you. The need for Latin America to focus and plan its intervention in building a multipolar world of sovereign nations to ensure that we have equality among citizens and that we all have a right to happiness as well. Thank you very much.